Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Blizzard finally added the legendaries for warlocks and hunters in a functional testable state. And I think maybe even shamans. I'll need to log on my shaman to test this stuff out. But in today's video, I want to take a look at these legendaries, use them in combat against some trained dummies so you guys can see what the effect looks like. Give you some of my thoughts in terms of what I think about the legendaries, and also tell you about what I think is going to be the viability of these. Are these legendaries looking like they could potentially replace your current class legendaries in patch 9.1? This is the first look at an early look of these legendaries, but they're finally here for testing, and I want to see what they all look like and play like. First Lego is going to be for Hunters. Hunters Lego is going to be the Necrolord one, since this is the most exciting one. The Necrolord legendary reads, bag of munitions. Up to 2 targets hit by your death chakram are also hit by explosive shot. If I throw my chakram at 3 trained dummies, you'll see that they actually have the explosive shot debuff, 2 of them will. And that'll do AoE damage to everybody in the area. That's quite a bit of damage, especially if it crits. I don't really know how it works for marksman. Does it overwrite an active explosive shot? That's something that's worth testing. So hitting this enemy with explosive shot into a death chakram. Explosion went off. Explosion went off. So it doesn't overwrite an explosion. So you do keep an explosion. If you do have explosive shot and this legendary, you will get 2 explosive shots like you're supposed to, which is a good thing. I was worried it might override the effect. To me, I would love for this legendary to actually be good in Mythic Pluses. It doesn't even have to be good in single target. I would actually be so happy if this thing was actually kind of decent for M+. I think for Beast Mastery, this would be quite a bit of AoE. For Survival, that's even more explosions together with your grenades. For Marksman, just to have the idea of a Necrolord Hunter actually be kind of decent in Mythic Plus would be cool, since I think out of all the different covenants, this one is probably one of the least represented ones. Next, we have the Venthyr legendary that's finally available for testing. The Venthyr legendary is Pouch of Razor Fragments. Bonus kill shots from Flayed Shot ability. Cost 6 targets within 8 yards to bleed for 35% additional damage by kill shot. So it's quite a bit of extra damage on paper. So just to make sure you guys get to see how this looks like. So when I Flayed Shot the enemy, I have a chance for my kill shots to proc to be free on the target that doesn't need to be an execute. And now that's going to put up this extra bleed that's really difficult to see, but is there with Pouch of Razor Fragments. And this applies every time I kill shot. And the damage that does is actually not bad at all. Like when you look at it, like there goes another bleed. I just had the Flayed Shot coming off CD. The kill shots themselves do a bit of damage. The pouch on AoE is really not terrible. And what I also want to show you is the Flayed Shot itself with your Pouch of Razor Fragments. It is still pretty decent on single target. One thing I noticed while you are getting kill shots with Pouch of Razor, the Razor's bleed applying on the enemy, if you are able to get a bunch of kill shots back to back on the target, your bleed doesn't roll into one another. It actually overwrites the currently active bleed. So let's say you have a big crit kill shot that puts a strong bleed on the target, and then your next kill shot right afterwards gets a proc and it's just like a plain kill shot, and then the overwrites the big bleed with a smaller bleed, so it's not nearly as good. But take a look at the numbers themselves. Kill shots, of course, is going to do big damage. Your Flayed Shot does a little bit of damage to a playstyle, but the Pouch does more damage than your Covenant ability on single target. Because the legendary does more damage than the Covenant ability, not including the extra kill shot procs, I'm hoping it'll be good. I love how it transforms the Venthyr ability from a pure single target into something that's okay in cleaves, potentially, or maybe kind of okay in 5 target AoE. Potentially. Numbers wise, I'm hoping the Blizzard balances this thing out so it's actually usable. How cool would it be? As for right now though, it's hard to ascertain if it's actually going to be numerically better. Blizzard might have to pump up some damage numbers for this for it to actually be good. Next, we have the Kyrian Hunter legendary for testing. Pact of the Soul Stalkers. When Resonating Arrow deals damage to a target, your party gains 10% increased critical strike chance for 10 seconds. So normally your Resonating Arrow already provides you a higher chance to hit the enemy with crit, 30% increased crit chance on them. But with this legendary being used, not only will you be able to see enemies through walls and have a 30% crit chance, you also gain 10% crit on top of it. So altogether I have 39 crit on the character, well 29 crit normally, but it's like 39, basically 40% crit there, 30% from Resonating Arrow. Together, I think it amounts to like a 70% crit if it's additive and not multiplicative. I think this legendary is going to be niche. It is something interesting to bring to the Kyrian Hunter playstyle, but I do think it's going to be limited in how many people might be interested in helping other players succeed instead of watching your numbers go bigger. I am weird because I do like the helpful group-oriented covenants and legendaries and abilities, but majority of players would rather see themselves do most of the damage. So I'm hoping, if anything, it might be a niche Lego that some hunters bring into maybe Mythic Pluses for the groups, maybe sometimes for raids, but besides that, I don't really think it's going to have any more pull past it. Then we have the Night Fae Legendary, and the Night Fae Lego is kind of interesting. When Wild Spirits hits fewer than 5 targets, so at 4, 3, 2, and 1, there's a 35% chance it'll cause Wild Spirits to damage the second time. This one, I think, is going to be hard to compete with some of the other Hunter Legos. But let's say we throw down the Wild Spirits. We're just going to go for Arcane Shots. I just want to see how often can we see the actual procs for Wild Spirits to hit multiple times. So there's one separate hit here. I think that's probably when you first initially throw down the ability. And this is the actual proc effect. So out of my 10 Arcane Shots, I got 12 hits from Wild Spirits. I mean, normally during my playstyle, you wouldn't be actually spamming Arcane Shots. I just want to show you that, yes, it does work. But from 10 Arcane Shots, I only gain 2 extra hits for it. I don't like how it's a RNG legendary, and the 35% chance for me wouldn't be super value. On the actual sims, we'll find more information about how good this Lego may be, but as of right now, it's really hard to tell. You could get one of those streaks where you just get really good procs, or you could get streaks when you're getting no procs whatsoever, and it'll be super unfortunate to play this Lego and just get no procs in single target fights. I think a more consistent legendary that doesn't have to play off of RNG honestly could be a better option. Next, we have Warlocks and their legendaries. We have the new one for testing for the Necrolords with Shard of Annihilation. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical strike chance by 100% and critical strike damage by 54, one of your abilities. Shadow Bolt, Drain Soul if you're talented for Affliction, Incinerate, or a Demon Bolt for Demonology. So for your Affliction Warlocks, potentially Necrolords might end up being the play for Affliction because of Withering Bolt. They keep nerfing Withering Bolt, so maybe that's going to be less so of a case now since the recent nerf for Withering Bolt, but earlier in the week people said that, you know, Necrolord actually isn't looking that bad because you can get for a big Shadow Bolt or a big Drain Life. Necrolord, Drain Life, and Decimating Bolt, it only gives you 1 Drain that's going to be stronger and empowered, but it still could be pretty good if you get the full value channel for it. I'm hoping that this legendary will at least be a niche legendary for pure single target. It does seem to be very specified in terms of how it works, as it just makes your Covenant ability even stronger, but already that Covenant ability was kind of okay. Unlike the Hunter legendaries, there's not a lot of transformation of like single target becomes AoE or vice versa. With the Warlocks, it just kind of amps the ability to be even stronger. For Affliction, I don't think it's going to change things. I think Malefic Wrath will still be their best legendary. Same thing for Demonology and Destro. I think they already have powerful competitive legendaries, and I just don't know how good this is going to be numerically. Then we have the Night Fae Legendary, which is going to be Decaying Soul Satchel. Each target affected by Soul Rot increases your haste and crit strike by 5% for 8 seconds. So when you use the actual Covenant ability, it'll give you a buff. The more targets it hits, the more value it's going to get for all your extra buffs and debuffs. This does feel like an AoE legendary, or at least an AoE focus, as hitting a single target will only give you 5% haste and 5% crit. Hitting 4 targets with this ability will give you up to 20% haste and 20% crit. My gut feeling says Warlocks already have very strong legendaries, very consistent legendaries, and with slight adjustments to Warlocks in 9.1, it does look like some of the legendaries that already exist in the toolkit are looking strong. So I don't really know how this one is going to fill and fit into the playstyle. It could potentially be pretty good in Mythic Pluses in particular, but the fact that it's not good in single target, a Warlock could select a legendary that's good in both situations and just kind of dominate single target while being able to do well in cleave, AoE, whatever it may be. I think this one will purely come down to the sims, but I'm interested to see if this legendary could be good. This one is my favorite, the Venthyr legendary. It's so weird and so kind of wacky, but I love this one. The legendary that comes with Venthyr Covenant for Warlocks is going to be Contained Perpetual Explosion. Impending Catastrophe's final explosion damage is increased by 75, plus 15% for each additional enemy hit on the way to its final target. I love the idea behind this Lego, but the ability itself by itself without legendary is pretty bad. It is, I think, wildly panned by most warlocks. If I add a turnip in here, since this legendary does allow you to hit multiple enemies, it does actually hit everybody on the final blast. It will tag everybody, so it doesn't have any target caps. So mythic pluses, it could be okay. But I have a situation where I have a bunch of enemies that it will fly through, and the final enemy will take the most damage as well as the 2 targets near them. So this is more or less what this will look like. It'll actually build up in strength for the final big hit. The more enemies that it flies through, the more damage it's going to do at the very end. And you can kind of see the damage it does right here, until my details decide to reset itself completely. But hey, normal hits of like what looks like 600 to 800 on an enemy, crits of about 1,000, ticking down on a minute cooldown, so you can use it pretty often. I love the idea behind this legendary, but on single targets it's basically mute. In AoE it can kind of work, like the Covenant ability itself, and this legendary does make it a little bit better, but again, you also have to have like perfect angles to make sure it flies through a bunch of enemies. So you'll not want to hit the first enemy in like a clump of enemies. You'll want to hit somebody in the middle so it passes through a couple. Depending on how your tank lines up the adds and the targets, if it hits a bunch of them and then clips as many of them in the like a death ball as possible, the more of them it clips, the better. But the Covenant itself does very little damage for single target, and it does have some purpose in AoE. I don't really know that committing a whole legendary for a Covenant ability to buff it will be enough. Again, warlocks already have very competitive legendaries as is, so it'll be very, very, very difficult to judge just how strong this Covenant and this legendary are going to be when put together. The final Warlock Lego is going to be the Kyrian one, which I think is going to be cool on paper, but really difficult to line up. Unless it Havocs, then maybe, because I don't really play Kyrian. I think it's been a while since I've tried out Kyrian Warlock, so forgive me. I actually don't know if it Havocs or not, like the dot itself, Scouring Tithe. But when Scouring Tithe generates your soul shards, you gain 100% movement speed and 40% increased critical chance for 8 seconds. Again, a very small window to get yourself bigger damage, but well, 40% crit is quite significant. And if you can plan a bunch of damage during that window, that could be quite good, since Warlocks, as much of a dot heavy class they are, which you would imagine is a slow rotten class, they actually end up doing quite a bit of damage overall when it comes to burst. So it does work right now. So if I apply Scouring Tithe on the roamer and I hit him with a couple of conflags, it does give you movement speed, does give you the 40% crit. So when I throw Chaos Bolts at the Cloud Strider, he actually just blows up before the second one even hits him. But that's mostly having to do with their having low health. Question is, does it cleave? It does cleave. So that could be an actual solid option. Because look, the biggest problem with Scouring Tithe is you don't really ever want it to fall off. Or you don't really want it to fall off super often. Like, you kind of want the dot to be permanently there in the enemy. So for destruction, you could use it maybe like in a boss fight on Mythic Pluses, for example, right? And this is me just trying to make an argument for this Lego. Use it on a boss fight where you'll apply it on the enemy, the main boss, but you'll also have a Havoc on the ad. You know the ad is going to die. Like, think Hakar for the other side. Throw the Havoc on the ad, dot up the boss, which will dot up the ad. The ad will inevitably die, which gives you the value for this legendary that lets you burn through Hakar's shield. But then it also gives you Scouring Tithe back, because if the dot ticks out over 18 seconds and it doesn't kill the enemy, you'll get the cooldown back. So you'll get to use Scouring Tithe more often. If you can line it up together with your Havocs, then you get more value out of that legendary effect. So for example, if let's say I go with Lighthoof Roamer and the Altered Sentinel, and I try to nuke both of them down, I'll have the Lighthoof die hopefully at some point, and I get the legendary, and I still keep the dot on the Altered Sentinel. And as long as I let this dot tick out by itself, then I should be able to get the cooldown of this ability back and reuse it again, and there it goes. So in a sense, there is technically a playstyle where you could make this work, particularly I think as Destruction Warlock. But this is about as good as I can make this Lego, and only specifically for Destruction Warlock, because you'll be able to get the cooldown of this ability, and with short cooldown of Havoc, you should be able to use it more often. That's about as far as it goes, and only on specific fights where let's say you have a boss or some kind of a big ad in the middle of a trash pack where the trash is going to die before this big ad or big boss, like the fight on Hakar where the ads are a kill priority, where in most cases you're probably going to get some sort of value on this legendary, but again, very specific, very niche situation, and only primarily for destruction. As Affliction, you'll have to wait for the full cooldown of this ability to come back. As just Demonology, same thing. The only reason a Havoc, Destro, Warlock would be able to utilize this more often is because the Scouring Tides, you'll be putting 2 of them on 2 separate targets. So maybe you can cheese some damage, but that's about as good as it could make it. For the Shamans, none of the Legendaries are looking really all that strong. So I didn't really go into too much of a in-depth kind of video commentary for them. But the first one is going to be Seeds of Rampant Growth from Night Fae. Each pulse of your Night Fae Transfusion ability reduces the cooldown of Feral Spirits, Healing Tide Totem, and Fire Elemental. Elemental and Enhancement Shamans already came out and said this looks like a weaker version of some of the Legendaries or abilities we already have. Maybe somewhat useful for Resto to get Healing Tide more often in PvP together with another Honor talent, or maybe sometimes for raids, but a weaker version of what some of the other cooldown reduction elements that Shamans already have. For Venthyr, you have Elemental Conduit, where each friendly target healed by Chain Harvest automatically has Riptide on them. Each enemy has Flame Shock. Potentially, it could be maybe okay for Elemental Shamans or Restoration Shamans to put up a bunch of dots and hots on allies and enemies, but compared to some of the other Legendaries, again, it just does not seem worth for the 1.5 minute cooldown that your Chain Harvest has. Chain Harvest is a good ability by itself, but this effect compared to some of the other Legendaries, which are already really strong, is really difficult to pick. Kyrian one is kind of interesting. Raging Vesper Vortex. When all charges of Vesper Totem are consumed, Vesper Totem will do a final blast of healing and damage. This means that as an Enhancement Shaman, you will need to expend 3 damaging charges of Vesper Totem and also 3 healing charges. Yes, you'll have to stand there and cast healing spells for your Vesper Totem to actually have its final burst. The final blast to me felt like quite a bit of damage on 5 targets, but in single target I really could have a hard time seeing it. I am someone who actually plays Kyrian Shaman, which is not super common, but this one just feels so weird. As a Restoration Shaman, I could see using a bit of offensives, a bit of heals in order to trip up this effect. As Elemental and Enhancement, it does feel weird. The damage would need to be super high for this Legendary to be worth the payoff, and the numbers would have to be like 10 times the numbers they are right now in order to really be part of the playstyle, but it would be an interesting playstyle nonetheless. Finally, for Necrolords, you have Splintered Elements. Each additional Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst, or a Healing Surge generated by Primordial Wave increases your haste by 5% for 10 seconds. And even then, this Legendary does not seem right now, from the class guide writers from the Shamans on Discord as well as your regular websites, they don't really look all that good. The problem is not that the Covenant Legendaries are weak, it's just Shamans already existing Legendaries are really strong, and they're probably going to continue being pretty dang good going into patch 9.1. So Blizzard would really need to do a lot of buffs for these Covenant Legendaries in order to make them better for Shamans, or at least worth considering. But as it stands right now, the current class guide writers came out and said that these are not looking competitive. I can only comment for the Kyrian Shaman. That one does seem weird, and I feel like the only way to make it good is to give it really big payoff for changing up your playstyle completely. And maybe that's something Blizzard would need to do in the future, is adjust the way that some of these Legendaries play, buff them significantly, provide a lot more stats and value and damage in terms of playing these Legos. They're not bad Legendaries by themselves inherently, it's just, again, as it stands right now, the Shaman's Legendaries are really strong. And honestly, maybe that's a good thing going into patch 9.1. But I want to thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Sorry if it was a little bit long, but I wanted to show off these Legendaries and give you guys my thoughts now that we have more of a functional version of them for 9.1. If any other Legendaries get added to the next PTR build, you'll know I'll be there to make a video on it, to show you guys what these Legendaries look like and talk about their feasibility. But as of right now, that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.